first-person shooters. But I think Dahlia does a better job of it. He's also somebody who's willing to experiment, which is actually a trait that I value quite a bit on Twitch. I don't think this happens enough. It's actually something I wound up talking with W. Shand about at the last Twitch meetup, but he's been doing these ASMR casts, or as I like to call them, the ASMR casts. But just somebody who's a lot of fun to be around. So for those of you who are on the channel and you want to try something new, Dahlia is somebody who I enjoy co-op casting with. He's somebody who I enjoy hanging out with. It's a chance for you to see me behave like a complete ass in somebody's channel. But more importantly is somebody who has done a lot to bring us to that 320 number. And again, you don't want to be too focused on things like numbers, but... Oh, did the sound just cut out? All right, guys, I'm just going to keep talking because to me, the stream is still going. This has happened once before, but... Oh. I know you can hear the typing. I'm gonna say the stuff to chat, and hopefully I can get everything back up. All right, so if I can read, it's still up. Okay, awesome. Sorry, guys. This is going to be a little awkward for a minute while we catch and back up sync. I'm going to be treating this as if we're still going as far. Actually, you know, it's probably transcoding if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so anyways, Black Dahlia, again, does a better job of variety, and I will say this both in terms of the type of games that he plays, but also in terms of the fact that he's willing to experiment and willing to do some things that are different. So as much as I like to make fun of him and stuff like that, he's somebody who has been a big friend of this cast. Again, somebody who has been one of the most supportive figures in terms of pushing people into the channel, even against their wishes. He has done his best. He has scolded his channel to bring me up. So the least that I could do is to give him a shout out myself. But more importantly, I think you guys are actually going to have a lot of fun in his channel. I know I have fun going in there, and I think you guys would too. So if you've not given him a follow, I definitely recommend that you do that. Give him a shot. See if it's your kind of thing. I think he's one of the people who's actually doing interesting stuff on Twitch, and that alone makes it worthwhile. All right, let me just take a look. I'll just catch up on these. Oh, thanks for those files. Awesome. I always like it when people actually follow up on that stuff. So Black Dahlia, you're looking guilting. We're back. Transcoding, that's interesting. Okay, great, yeah. Transcoding always screws me over. So I think like the audience just got cut in half thanks to transcoding. But I don't care because I'm going to be giving these shout outs. I wonder if it didn't count out because you're a Mac like you. Yes, clearly. Mac overlords. Yeah, it was like 20 before. So 12... I mean, it's 12 viewers now because of transcoding, but it was 20 viewers thanks to the host. So thank you, everybody who's hanging out. Is the story time going to be one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish? Why did I add the flishes? One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. No, it will not. So, with that in mind, I also want to take a minute here and give a shout out to Jazzpoo, who is also a streamer. Mostly I have seen her play either classic games like Mario or Crypt of the NecroDancer, which we have firmly established as being an unbeatable game. I've actually wanted to stream that myself, but I haven't been able to get it to do a proper full screen mode without covering my chat. So, you get to see me fail at Crypt of the NecroDancer at some point in the future. But, Mac American Overlord Woman, Overlady. Get it right, System Jock. I'm never gonna... I think Flish is probably a more offensive mark against the English language than my alleged nuclear. It is nuclear is the... I always say it nuclear, so nuclear is the incorrect. I don't know. So apparently I said nuclear at one point. I don't believe it is correct. I think somebody just made that up and it became a meme. But in any case, people insist that I pronounce it with a U. His voice trumps your ability to be mean. Yeah, Black Dahlia is busy fixing it. That's a bald-faced lie. I said nuclear. Well, I mean, you guys can refer to the video if you want, but So far, nobody's given me the evidence. All right, what else were we going to say? Martha Flishes. So Jazzpoo is somebody who also does some streaming. And somebody who, I mean, in this case, I've gotten to know Jazzpoo as a mod of Black Dahlias, but as somebody who I've gotten a chance to know through stream as well. Also, somebody who does a cam. I haven't been visiting as often, but I think that's just because the timings haven't been working out for me, which is something I can say a little bit more often. But as somebody who clearly is hanging out, there's one thing, it's one thing to just come through a raid, and then, especially when I start talking for a long time like this, get bored and fall away from the raid. But one thing that's notable about Jazzpoo is somebody who's actually come and always shown that support and has actually spent the time to keep following through on the channel. So again, it's one of these things that's really nice and I like to recognize in terms of support. So I'd also like to say that Black Dahlia is joining us through some other hosts today. So we've got Mr. Pornstar, also known as Mr. XXXV. We've got Dark Duchess 90, who is just starting out as a streamer, as a fellow Mac streamer. So I know I spent a lot more time talking about this before, so I'll feel bad for giving this short shrift, but I definitely recommend, especially somebody myself who's not that far out of the starting out stream phase, definitely recommend that you guys give her a follow and check her out. She's a fun streamer. Saw her doing the streams at The Sims last time, and somebody who I think would benefit from having some people in the chat to interact with, although certainly handles herself very well without, but somebody I think is definitely worthy of your attention. Miss Ariella, a fellow Team Panda member, somebody who you guys are probably more familiar with through Team Panda, and of course, Black Dahlia's great support of that organization, along with Torjin, another Team Panda member and one of the people who evaluated my application for joining. Finally, one other Team Panda member, Weebro, who's probably got one of the best professional layouts that I've seen, alongside with, Jesse Quill. And certainly as far as the energy in terms of presentation also matches Jesse Quill and Seriously Claire and all these other streamers who I look up to. So that is a lot of people who are hosting me tonight. We're at 6 channels, which I think is close to, if not the record for the channel. And I think I need to give you guys some Hand of Fate action alongside story time at the end of the stream. So how are you guys doing tonight? What were you playing, Black Dahlia? Something glitters in the dim sunlight that reaches the base of the cavern. Climb down to take a look. So the important thing to remember here, in the gloom of the narrow canyon... Sorry, guys. I'm just going to take a quick second because I know I'm going to be doing story time. I'm just going to take a very brief time away from the keyboard to get myself some water because I'm definitely feeling it in my voice and I am still kind of sick. So I want to make sure that my voice is in order for the Shadowrun cast. All right. Thanks, guys. Don't let the voice die. We still need story time. Yes, you'll still get story time, but I'm a little...
for an appropriate player. It seems there are more eons ahead.
I'm still waiting for... I still need to keep this thing healthy for August the 20th. For those of you who are just coming by the way, we will be playing Shadowrun Hong Kong at 10 o'clock in the morning on August the 20th, which is the 0 hour for launch for that game. We did Dragonfall. It was a lot of fun. I got a chance to ham it up a little bit with the narration and the dialogue. So if you guys like those styles of games and you want a chance to hear me do some narration, that's going to be one there as well. All right. And you finished Max Payne 3 and then played Wolfenstein: The Old Blood? I wasn't aware that there was an option to play as the Nazis in The Old Blood. May not sell for much in its current state, but perhaps you can find someone who can make use of it. You take it and make your way back up the path. Excuse me, guys. All right, so we're going to go back to the Holy Forge. Now, again, this is a point of redundancy because I already just got this really cool weapon, but we might get an even cooler weapon here. So on a dusty, lonely plain, you come across the shattered remains of an old monastery. Searching the building, you meet an old man dressed in dirty robes. Long ago, we of the Brotherhood forged holy weapons to support the war against the infidels, but the infidels were strong, and one day one of their raiding parties took us by surprise. They destroyed most of our tools and took our supplies, including the rare metal ore that we used to craft our weapons. The king's army never returned after that day. I know not what became of them in the years that followed. I have stayed here all these years, but only the ghosts remain to keep me company. All of the others who survived the attack left long ago. Give the monk your sample of ore. The monk's eyes widen in surprise as he exclaims, "By the old gods, where did you find that?" He looks over the metal carefully. "If you're willing to put in the hard work, stranger, together we can fire up the old forge one last time." You spend several days with the old monk. Day by day you toil together at the forge, and by night you swap tales of your adventures for a share of his food. Eventually you hold the completed weapon in your hands. Battle hammer. So you always get the same thing from this event. 40 damage, string together consecutive attacks to do massive damage. Press 1 to unleash a powerful explosion. So this would be replacing the Thunder Strike. Every strike inflicts lightning damage. Press 1 for lightning strike around you. In this case, I like Thunder Strike a little bit more, so I won't equip the Battle Hammer. Thank you, warrior, for giving this old relic one last chance to prove its worth. Good luck on your journey. So overall, if you take a look at what we did for strategy, we're up 17 food. The one problem is that we still haven't gotten any extra health. We haven't done any combat yet, which is a bit of a problem. Hopefully, that will change for the next dungeon. So we found a friendly trader willing to let you ride on his wagon. Hitch a ride. So Shadowrun and CK2 stream are both important. Yes, apologies for not doing CK2 on Friday, but obviously, like, my voice was brutal on Friday, so. Did claim to be from Frankfurt at one point. Okay, that just... I'd maybe be a little bit more worried if I found out, like, Black Dahlia's parents were, like, from Argentina, or, you know... It is Argentina where all the Nazis went, was it? Or was it Brazil? I don't know. Frankfurt sounds like a weird hot dog. All right, Erksy, thanks a lot for hanging out. Hopefully we'll get to see you next time. Hot Doge. Dark Duchess scared Jazz. Nope, there's always a joke in that game that was exactly that. Yeah. All right, Splintered Jewels. On every successful combat without gauntlets, the player loses a ring. Well, I believe I have gauntlets. Let's just take a quick inventory check.
Drawn from your thoughts and your memories. Every card tainted by your view of the world.
So you've got...
And your single-minded purpose. The same singularity of purpose that brings you here.
Oh, wow, I don't... Oh, no, I do have gauntlets. All right, so basically, I'm keeping Thunderstrike, although I do have the Battle Hammer as an option. Armor of Cold, I'm generally happy with. We've got 3 curses right now, so we've got Tainted, which means I can't sell anything. We've got Weak Ankles, which means I'm slower. And we've got Splintered Jewels, so without gauntlets, which I'm assuming is gloves, the player loses a ring. In terms of rings we can potentially lose, we've got the Ring of Hindsight. All encounter cards are replaced upon reaching the next stairs. We've got the Merchant Ring. All shops are revealed when entering a new region. And finally, Killing Streak. Every kill earns player a stackable speed and damage boost. Taking damage resets this bonus to nil. So this kind of offsets the curse, but not really, because I'll be taking damage in the final fight. Don't have a very good shield right now, but, you know, a shield is shield. We've got the Lion Prince Helm, so health gain from eating is increased as my health gets lower. We've already done Blessings and Curses, so we seem to be where... Oh yeah, and the Hag's Wraps. Each strike inflicts a curse, slowing and weakening your opponent. So I'm thinking we go to the right and around like this, because it's most likely, well, you know what? On second thought, let's go north. Oh, 7 channels. Hang on. Somebody just... Sleepbringer! Let me catch up with South America in general. All right. Get your pillows ready. It's a Sleepbringer raid. My goodness, guys, 7 hosts today. Let's catch up who is coming into this host. So Sleepbringer, obviously, the host of the channel, another member of Team Panda. Mega Man Extreme 2, thank you very much. Mjolnir's Might, I can remember you from last time. Mega Man Extreme again. And that's what we've got right now. So, all the SC love. Yeah, guys, this is incredible. Thank you very much for all of the love. And we've got to the folks who have not decided to copy and paste. I do see that there was more from the raid. Excuse me, more from the raid. So thank you very much, everybody who came through with Sleepbringer. Again, I feel a need to speak up, speak well about the people who are hosting in this, and it's not just because, of course, they're doing me a nice turn. These are people who I legitimately enjoy myself. I always like to call Sleepbringer as somebody who does fighting games, but the irony of this is I don't actually watch that many of his fighting game streams. I think the last one I watched was Smash Brothers, although I believe he does do other games. I also remember him doing Borderlands, which is a lot of fun to watch him go against a particularly hard boss. But what were you playing tonight, Sleepbringer? Dark Duchess, you are a cool kid. Need to go to bed. Have a good night. Have a good night, Black Dahlia. Platinum Hamster's hosting me as well. My God. Platinum Hamster, I don't know. Actually, Platinum Hamster has been doing a lot of two really interesting games. So there's Quiplash, which is a lot of fun to play. But we also have got Choice Chamber. He's one of the people. So his and Jesse Quill's Choice Chamber streams I actually like watching in particular. I wasn't crazy about the game the first time that I watched it, but I've warmed up to it a little bit. I think those two streamers are particular reasons for that as well. So, my God, guys, so many people that I need to thank. What have we got here? Platinum Hamster, hope you are doing well. Twitch broke the stream is so slow on all channels. I'm sorry to hear that, Lorgosh. Play some Nuclear Throne. Wait, did I just say No, I said Nuclear. And then Dark Souls 2, two great games. Litu, who does a little bit of Crusader Kings, drew my attention to Nuclear Throne. I can't play Dark Souls 2, unfortunately. My PC is not good enough for it. So that's one of the reasons why I'd like to build a proper gaming PC. But that's after school, obviously. I don't think it's affordable to do otherwise. And love watching Ham's Choice Chamber. Yeah, it's tremendously fun to watch. Nuclear. That's a contribution of Black Dahlia's I'm not gonna be able to live down. I need to second guess myself every time I say that on a stream now too. It's really irritating. Platinum Hamster is the hammiest hamster. Nullwich is a little more than wooden planks and sticking out over water. It's a den of iniquity. Visitors and inquiries are obviously not welcome. You spend your time getting acquainted with the workings of the wharf, looking for avenues to gain information. Well, we really need combat at this point. I was originally going to try drinking with the captain to see what that does, but I need to get my health up, so we'll still do a best attempt. But yeah, sure enough, we fail, so we get to take on 2 monster cards. Platinum Hamster does indeed go ham. Very nice, guys. Joseph has also come from the Sleepbringer. Well, Joseph 1347. I hope the other 1346 Josephs feel very bad for taking your name. Thank you very much for stopping by. It's always great to have new people inside the stream. I don't think I've seen you here before. Apologies if I didn't remember you. But I understand that you got to enjoy Nuclear Throne, as well as Dark Souls 2, two games which I've not been able to play myself, although I do own Dark Souls 2, only to find out that my PC couldn't run it. So, irritating Chalk is probably Dahlia's life goal, so he's done well. Okay, I'm not going to shout out Dahlia anymore. But Joseph, thanks a lot for stopping by. I know it's one thing to join a raid, but it's one thing to join a raid. But I really appreciate the fact that a lot of these streamers actually have people who are actually stopping by and giving the streamer a chance. So I hope you enjoy your time here. But even if this isn't your thing, I definitely appreciate you taking the time to give me a chance. Because I know I even do this sometimes too. Ooh, Queen of Dust. Oh my God, this is going to be so hard. So these are 2 bosses in the game, which means that there's also going to be some ads. Although this is also an opportunity to get a lot of bonus. Joseph, thank you very much for that follow as well. All right, I'm not going to be able to pay attention to chat for a little bit because it's going to be particularly hard, but I'll do my best to... make it worthwhile. So, oops, Jesus. So basically, for combat in this, the green attacks are ones that you can actually counterattack. The red ones are not dodgeable. So one of the things I'm contending with right now is the fact that I've got a pair of sort of boss fights in addition to a bunch of ads Generally, the bosses are undodgeable, which is why I'm running around like a coward so much. And at this point, kind of my strategy is going to be... Oh yeah, I should also mention that the King of Dust heals allies as well. So in this case here, I'm going to try and catch some people either in a group like this, or individually and do some damage on them. There's definitely a benefit at this point, though, to just dodging more often than not. Oh, I'm screwed. I think this is the end of the run, guys. Yikes! Yeah. I just didn't position myself well for that, so we die.
So it goes.
Alright, well, that's a little disappointing end to that. I normally should be able to do a combat like that, but I think going into something against two bosses with 40 health is a bit of a tall order. So I definitely could have... I think I could have handled that combat a little bit better. But that's sort of the drawback of the strategy I was trying to do tonight, which is you need to build up a little bit more health before you take on the substantial fights. My goodness, we got a bunch of people here. So let me just catch up. I'll catch up on chat a little bit. We're probably done with Hand of Fate tonight, but that doesn't mean we're at the end of the stream, especially with so many people here. We're going to do something a little bit different, and it's going to be a little unique. It's going to be pretty much non-gaming, except when you account for the Crusader Kings 2 stuff. So I'm going to explain what it is. If it's not your thing, that's fine. I just keep in mind we are going to be hosting another channel after this, so if you guys want to still hang out for a bit afterwards, I'd appreciate it. But I'll just I'll catch up with chat. I'll talk a little bit about Hand of Fate so I can promote it to you guys, and then we'll go on to our last thing for the evening. So I'll just keep it up here while I catch up with chat. All right, thank you for the welcome. Well, no, Joseph, again, I think it's the least that I can do to welcome you. The support that you've given me with a follow and hanging out is more than I could ask for. I'm sorry it's going to be so short for you, just because I am a bit sick, and I am going to be... So for those of you who are just new, normally I will be doing streams on Monday and Friday. I did miss last Friday because I've been sick. My voice apparently hasn't been that affected. I'm still getting over it, but I am trying to preserve it. But we're going to be doing something special for August the 20th, which I believe is this Thursday. I am on Pacific time. At 10 o'clock in the morning, they're going to be releasing the new Shadowrun game, Shadowrun Hong Kong. We went through Shadowrun Dragonfall. I am told that I'm okay at narration, so if you guys want to hear a lot of the cyberpunk-style narration, we're going to be doing a big, substantial playthrough of that game. It's probably not going to be anything like a 24-hour stream or that, but we are going to do as much Shadowrun as we can on the launch date. And we'll probably do some other streams as well. But normally we do Monday and Friday evenings, and something special will be happening this Thursday, so if that seems like a game that you're interested in, definitely feel free to hang out for that. Vendelo, how's it going? I am not sure if you came in through one of the other raids, or if you're just interested in Hand of Fate, but welcome to the channel either way. Or if you're just following and you if you just drew your attention there. Hammy didn't say shush to you, so guys, all the lovely people in here all of a sudden. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm extremely fortunate with not just the number of people in here tonight, but the specific people. There's some very high quality streamers and some very active viewers in the channel right now. So guys, thank you very much for that. All right, Jazzpoo totally did not bring this channel up to Vendi. Thank you, Jazzpoo, for shouting out this terrible channel. Platinum Hamster spanning all the emotes. Cool game. Yeah, this is a really neat game. I'll do my best to summarize it for you, because we will be playing this again. We might even do this next Monday, actually. I really enjoyed doing this. As you can see, we made no progress on this boss at all, but it's a tough one, so I'm happy we get to see it. Dark Duchess has no control of the purple wall anymore. That is totally fine. Jazz totally didn't she send here? All right, Vendela. Well, I'll keep Jazz around for a little while longer if she's bringing new people to the channel. So thank you very much. Mecha gonna go AFK for a little bit. That's fine. We're probably gonna do story time after this. So if I don't get a chance to see you before the end of the night, have a great evening. Yeah, the dealer is definitely a very tough boss. I generally make it to the boss fight, but tonight I don't even think I made it to the boss fight once. So apparently I've regressed in my skill. Mecha kind of wants to listen to Convo. Despo, that settles it then. Yeah. Have a good stream. Have a good night, Mecha Fanboy. Man, so many purple. Yeah, I actually didn't realize how many purple people are here. More purple. Must stop the purple wall. Oh my god, am I really this far on chat? Sorry guys, I'm just going to catch up. Platinum Hamster has gotten offended and is storming off and leaving. Oh, because he got bitten. CPO is interject. He's the lone representative of Orange. I made the effort. Yeah, there we go. Okay, I finally caught up on chat. So Venela was talking to Jazz and literally said, I don't know who to watch. And then she said she was watching... Oh my goodness, so Venela, I'm probably going to do some tremendous disrespect for you by not playing this game again. But with that in mind, I hope you enjoy the next thing that's coming up. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different for this channel next, but I'll do my best to kind of explain what Hand of Fate is for the people who maybe just came in and wondering what the hell was going on, and then we'll go on to the special thing we're going to do tonight. It won't take that long, so I'll definitely host somebody else. It would be terrible of me not to send you guys off to somebody else at the end of this, but I am going to I promise some story time for people afterwards, so we'll switch this to gaming talk shows once I finish talking about Hand of Fate. Sleepburger, did you just call Dark Duchess a dinosaur? Believe it or not, Chalk, you actually like the stream. You just hide it well. All right, Jazzpoo. We'll keep you around for another week. Thank you very much. Is this game free to play? Unfortunately not, Joseph. It is. I think some people would say it's rather costly. Actually, let me just take a quick minute here. I should be able to bring up what's the best way for me to do this? I think under the community hub. It's going to take a while to load because I'm on a really poor internet connection. So the prices that you're going to see this are in Canadian. So for Canadian, it is $24.99. Excuse me. And then $5 for the wildcard DLC. So to say what this is like, the best analogy that I can draw would be to the game FTL. So sort of the idea here of wanting to explore these floors of a dungeon, or in the case of FTL, these different solar systems to sort of build up your arsenal, your armor, your equipment, and things like that. You build your deck, so it's got sort of the Hearthstone, the collectible card game elements to it in terms of sort of structuring a deck and building synergies to try and overcome the bosses as best as you can. But of course, the best that you can get through the deck construction is just the probability of something happening. So it's this really neat strategic element in terms of trying to build up a deck that will make it as effective as possible in terms of, in my case, I tried to make it robust to change rather than try and string together this really awesome combination. Now, it didn't work as well as I was planning this time, but I think I just need to get used to having a little bit less health. It's definitely a higher risk, higher reward. But in this game, you sort of progress through different champions for the dealer. We're at the very last level, which is the dealer himself, which means you're going to have some of the hardest challenges thrown at you, and you basically get new curses for each floor. Once you actually go into encounters, you'll see that it turns to sort of a third-person action game, so the combat's a little bit like the Batman games, I'm told. I haven't actually played the Batman games, but it sort of seems to be roughly what it is. You sort of chain together these combos and try to do counterattacks. So some people will think 25 is quite expensive for a game. Definitely in an age where you can get a lot of games free to play, or where you can get them in things like Humble Bundles, it is a little bit more costly. Personally, I think this game is worth the full price. If somebody had told me, okay, you can buy this on, I got this on sale. Certainly very happy with it. But if somebody told me it's like, okay, well, if you want to keep playing this, you need to pay the rest of the full price. Personally, I would pay that. I think it's a very well done game made in Unity, which is a freely available engine now. I believe this is made with money from the government of Australia. I think a very high quality game, wonderful artwork. Just looking at this screen here alone kind of is very attractive. It's really interesting to look at. It's got this nice little lore going on in the background. Wonderful little progression system. The first levels are very easy, but the difficulty ramps up nice and quickly, so you have some very legitimate challenges. And then there's the endless mode. So if you just want to see how far that you can get, you know, how you can construct a deck which will basically make you face against anything, there's a lot that this game has to offer. So I recommend it highly. We'll probably be playing it again next Monday. All right, so I'll catch up on chat again. Lots of banter. That's good. Okay, guys, so I have committed that I'm going to be hosting somebody at the end of the stream. We are done with Hand of Fate for a while, but somebody...
Again, you face me.
Oh,
Again, you are a fool.
I was actually just doing this to quit out of the game. Somebody said jokingly that we were going to do story time, and this is one thing I've been wanting to do for a while. So for those of you who are new to the channel, one of the things that we do on Friday nights is a game called Crusader Kings 2. It's a kind of game that I really like because it's a bit like Civilization in the sense that you kind of learn a little bit more history than what you had intended. But it is a very good strategy game in its own right. Now, one of the things that's happened from playing Crusader Kings 2 and a companion title to it called Europa Universalis, and just generally, I haven't known that much about history. And so I sort of went out to try and find as much history reading as I could get. And there's a book that I ran across called The Little History of the World by an author named Ernst Gombrich. He's better known for his history of art called The Story of Art. But I actually first found out about him because of this book called A Little History of the World. So basically, this is just kind of leveraging the fact that people kind of like the sound of my voice. And so what I'm going to do, as a little bit of a companion to some of the Crusader Kings 2 stuff, I'm actually going to read a chapter of A Little History of the World. Now, it is a children's book, so the tone that it's going to take is a little bit of a lower level. But I've completed the book, and I really, really enjoyed reading it. I was really struck by how enjoyable it was. So the first couple of chapters are going to deal with things like prehistory, but we'll give this a try. It is just going to be me reading a book to you guys, but because it's a children's book, the chapters are short. So if you guys aren't here for reading, if you bear with me for a little while, we'll go on and we will host a channel which does some gaming later. If you guys don't want to listen to the reading, I completely understand that. It's not going to be a regular feature of the channel, or if it is, I'll just make sure it's in small doses. But I think this is there's enough love of the history that I think this is something worth trying. So I'm just going to switch to gaming talk shows. Come on, Twitch. And if you'll just bear with me a second, I'm going to grab, I'm just going to grab the book, and I probably should let somebody know I'm doing this because they might be interested. Oh. All right, so it looks like my alert. Oh, it's because I switched the Venge screen, so I didn't get to see who followed. Just bear with me a second. I can't see the dashboard right now. Sam Skulls, thank you very much for that follow. I'm just going to be running away from the keyboard for a quick second. I'll bring up some music for you guys while I do that, and we will get ready for story time. Where'd the music go? I'm leading you on, Dark Duchess. What do you mean? Oh my god, I feel like I've missed somebody here. Oh yeah, Jaspoo is not satisfied with just a host. Apparently I need to do a raid, so we'll see how many people are left over after I'm done story time. Dark Pleb. That's not nice. Platinum Hapster blocks Jazz's Snapchat, so she doesn't need to see that nasty purple. Compared to me, the rest of you are chill. That's absolutely not true. You've seen my behavior in Dahlia's channel. I walked away from the keyboard. Oh, well, I have to get the book. Just a pleb with pretty eyes. Now I'm gonna have to watch this webcam. Who is Bloodgallade? Good question, Bloodgallade. Tell us something about yourself while I open my storybook. System Shock thesis raid. Come on, guys. I'm not going to read you my thesis. Platinum Hamster falls asleep in the corner. Well, I hope you enjoy this wonderful children's book. Joseph's going to sleep. It's 1 a.m. Thank you very much for stopping by, Joseph. I hope you have a good sleep. If you want to enjoy some sounds to take you off to sleep, go ahead and keep the stream on. I really like the FTL soundtrack, but is there something else that we can do for... Actually, this is a question for you guys. Do you guys want to hear some music while we have this on the background? I'll try and keep it quiet, but... this is relaxing, but I'm wondering if I can maybe do... No, I guess I can't really do the Nervous Test Pilot stuff. I'm just trying to see if there's any other good game music I can put on in the background. Oh, you know what? Civilization music would be really good. Okay. Sorry guys, I know this is a big long setup, but I will get started as soon as I send one message I was supposed to do. I think what I'm gonna do is I'll put on the music for... It's a little dramatic, but I think the Civilization soundtrack would be a good... or the Beyond Earth soundtrack, rather, would be a good call for this. No offense, Chalk. Well, I'm not... I mean, I'm okay. I feel better about my thesis having talked to my advisor about it afterwards, but... no, I'm not going to read Asmar. Alright, so it looks... for whatever reason, I'm not able... Oh, here we go. Well, it's not connecting me to Slack, so... as tempting as I would be to read the preface, let's do... Well, let's just start at chapter 1. And it looks like chapter 1's only about 5 pages, so maybe we'll do 2 or 3. Alright guys, so this is A Little History of the World by E.H. Gombrich. Once upon a time. All stories begin with once upon a time. And that's just what this story is all about. What happened once upon a time? Once you were so small that even standing on your tiptoes, you could barely reach your mother's hand. Do you remember? Your own history might begin like this. Once upon a time, there was a small boy, or a small girl, and that small boy was me. But before that, you were a baby in a cradle. You wouldn't remember that, but you know that it's true. Your father and mother were also small ones, and so was your grandfather and your grandmother, a much longer time ago, but you know that too. After all, we say, they're old, but they too had grandfathers and grandmothers, and they too could say, once upon a time. And so it goes on, further and further back. Behind every once upon a time, there is always another. Have you ever tried standing between two mirrors? You should. You'll see a great long line of shiny mirrors, each one smaller than the one before, stretching away into the distance, getting fainter and fainter so you never see the last. But even when you can't see them anymore, the mirrors still go on. They're there, and you know it. And that's how it is with Once Upon a Time. We can't see where it ends. Grandfather's 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 grandfather. It makes your head spin. But say it again slowly, and in the end you'll be able to imagine it. Then add one more. That gets us quickly back into the past, and from there into the distant past. But you will never reach the beginning, because behind every beginning there's always another Once Upon a Time. It's like a bottomless well. Does all this looking down make you dizzy? It does me. So let's light a scrap of paper and drop it down that well. It will fall slowly, deeper and deeper. And as it burns, it will light up the sides of the well. Can you see it? It's going down and down. Now it's so far down that it's like a tiny star in the dark depths. It's getting smaller and smaller. And now it's gone. Our memory is like that burning scrap of paper. We use it to light up the past. First of all, our own. And then we ask old people to tell us what they remember. After that, we look for letters written by people who are already dead. And in this way, we light our way back. There are buildings that are just for storing old scraps on paper that people once wrote on. They're called archives. In them, you can find letters written hundreds of years ago. In an archive, I once found a letter that just said, "Dear Mummy, yesterday we ate some lovely truffles. Love from William." William was a little Italian prince who lived 400 years ago. Truffles are a special sort of mushroom. But we only catch glimpses, because our light is now falling faster and faster. 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years. Even in those days, there were children who liked good things to eat, but they couldn't write letters. 20,000, 50,000. And even then, people said, as we do, once upon a time. Now our memory light is getting very small. And now it's gone. And yet we know that it goes much further, to a time long, long ago, before there were any people and when our mountains didn't look as they do today. Some of them were bigger, but as rain poured down, it slowly turned them into hills. Others weren't there at all. They grew up gradually, out of the sea over millions and millions of years. But even before these mountains, there were animals, quite different from those today. They were huge and looked rather like dragons. How do we know that? We sometimes find their bones deep in the ground. When I was a schoolboy in Vienna, I used to visit the Natural History Museum, where I loved to gaze at the great skeleton of a creature called Diplodocus. An odd name, Diplodocus, but an even odder creature. It wouldn't fit into a room at a home, or even two for that matter. It was as tall as a very tall tree, and its tail was half as long as a football pitch. What a tremendous noise it must have made as it munched its way through the primeval forest. But we still haven't reached the beginning. All of it goes back much further, thousands of millions of years. That's easy enough to say, but stop and think for a moment. Do you know how long 1 second is? It's as long as counting. 1, 2, 3. And how about 1,000 million seconds? That's 32 years. Now try to imagine 1,000 million years. All that time there were no large animals, just creatures like snails and worms. And before then there weren't even any plants. The whole earth was formless and void. There was nothing. Not a tree, not a bush, nor a blade of grass, nor a flower, nothing green. Just barren desert rocks and the sea. An empty sea, no fish, no seashells, not even seaweed. But if you listen to the waves, what do they say? Once upon a time. Once the earth was perhaps no more than a swirling cloud of gas and dust, like those other far bigger ones that we can see today through our telescopes. For billions and trillions of years, without rocks, without water, without life, that swirling cloud of gas and dust made rings around the sun. And before that, not even the sun, our good old sun was there. Only weird and amazing giant stars and smaller heavenly bodies whirling among the gas clouds in an infinite, infinite universe. Once upon a time. But now all this peering down into the past is making us feel dizzy again. Quick, let's get back to the sun, to the earth, to the beautiful sea, to plants and snails and dinosaurs, to our mountains, and last of all to human beings. It's a bit like coming home, isn't it? And just so that once upon a time doesn't keep dragging us back down into the bottomless well, from now on we'll always shout, "Stop! When did that happen?" And if we also ask, and how exactly did that happen? we'll be asking about history. Not just a story, but our story. The story that we call the history of the world. Shall we begin? Chapter 2. The Greatest Inventors of All Time. Near Heidelberg in Germany, somebody was once digging a pit, and when they came across a bone deep down underground, it was a human bone, a lower jaw. But no human beings today have had jaws like this one. It was so massive and strong, and had such powerful teeth. Whoever owned it must have been able to bite really hard, and must have lived a long time ago for the bone to be buried so deep. On another occasion, but still in Germany, in the Neander Valley, a human skull was found. And this was also immensely interesting, because nobody alive today has a skull like this one either. Instead of a forehead like ours, it had 2 thick ridges above its eyebrows. Now if our thinking goes behind our foreheads, and these people didn't have any foreheads, then perhaps they didn't think as much as we do. Or at any rate, thinking must have been harder for them. So the people who examined the skull concluded that once upon a time, there were people who weren't very good at thinking, but who were better at biting than we are today. But now you're going to say, stop, that's not what we agreed on. When did these people live? What were they like? And how did they live? Your questions make me blush, as I have to admit that we don't know precisely. But we'll find out one day, and maybe you'll want to help. We don't know because those people didn't yet know how to write things down, and memory only takes us a little way back. But we're making new discoveries all the time. Scientists have found that certain materials, such as wood and plants and volcanic rocks, change slowly but regularly over very long periods of time. This means that we can work out when they grew or where they were formed. And since the discoveries in Germany, people have actually carried on searching and digging, and have made some startling finds. In Asia and Africa in particular, more bones have been found, some at least as old as the Heidelberg jaw. These were our ancestors who must have already been using stones as tools more than 150,000 years ago. They were different from the Neanderthal people, who appeared about 70,000 years earlier and inhabited the Earth for about 200,000 years. And I owe the Neanderthal people an apology, for despite their low foreheads, their brains were no smaller than most people today. But all these abouts with no names and dates, this isn't history, you say, and you are right, it comes before history. That is why we call it prehistory, because we only have a rough idea of when it happened. But we still know something about the people whom we call prehistoric. At the time when real history begins, and we come to that in the next chapter, people who've already had the things that we have today, clothes, houses, and tools. At the time when real history begins, and we will come to this in the next chapter, people already had the things that we have today, clothes, houses, and tools, plows to plow with, grains to make bread with, cows for milking, sheep for shearing, dogs for hunting and for company, bows and arrows for shooting, and helmets and shields for protection. Yet with all of these things, there must have been a first time. Someone must have made the discovery. Isn't it an amazing thought that one day a prehistoric man, or a woman, must have realized that meat from wild animals is easier to chew if it is first held over a fire and roasted? And that one day someone discovered how to make fire. Do you realize what that actually means? Can you do it? Not with matches, because they didn't exist, but by rubbing 2 sticks together until they become so hot that in the end they catch fire. Have a go and you'll see how hard that it is. Tools must have been invented by somebody too. The earliest ones were probably just sticks and stones, but soon stones were being shaped and sharpened. We found lots of these shaped stones in the ground, and because of these stone tools, we call this time the Stone Age. But people didn't yet know how to build houses. Not a pleasant thought, since at that time it was often intensely cold, and at certain periods far colder than today. Winters were longer than the summer, and the summers shorter. Snow lay deep throughout the year, not only in the mountaintops, but in the valleys as well, and glaciers, which were immense in those days, spread far out into the plains. This is why that we say the Stone Age began before the last ice age ended. Prehistoric people must have suffered dreadfully from the cold, and if they came across a cave where they could shelter from the freezing winds, how happy they must have been. For this reason, they are known as cavemen, although they may not have actually lived in caves. Do you know what else these cavemen invented? Can't you guess? They invented talking. And I mean having real conversations with each other using words. Of course, animals also make noises. They cry out when they feel pain and make warning calls when danger threatens, but they don't actually have names for things as human beings do. And prehistoric people were the first creatures to do so. They invented something else that was wonderful too. Pictures. Many of these can still be seen today, scratched and painted on the walls of caves. No painter alive could do better. The animals they depict don't exist anymore, but they were painted so long ago. Elephants with long, thick coats of hair and great curving tusks, woolly mammoths, and other Ice Age animals. Why do you think these prehistoric people painted animals on the walls of caves? Just for decoration? That doesn't seem likely, because the caves were so dark. Of course, we can't be sure, but we think that they may have been trying to make magic, and they believed that painting pictures of animals on the walls could make those animals appear. Rather like when we say, "talk of the devil," when somebody we've been talking about suddenly turns up unexpectedly. After all, these animals were their prey, and without them they would starve. So they may have been trying to invent a magic spell. It would have been nice to think that such things work, but they never have yet. The Ice Age lasted for an unimaginably long time. Many tens of thousands of years, which is just as well, for otherwise these people would not have had the time to invent all these things. But gradually the earth grew warmer and the ice retreated to the high mountains, and people, who by now were much like us, learnt with the warmth to plant grasses and then to grind the seeds to make a paste which they could bake in the fire. And this was bread. In the course of time they learned to build tents and tame animals, which until then had roamed freely around. And they followed their herds, as people in the Lapland still do. Because forests were dangerous places in those days, home to large numbers of wild animals such as wolves and bears, people in several places, and this is often the case with inventors, had the same exact excellent idea. They built pile dwellings in the middle of lakes, huts on stilts, rammed deep into the mud. By this time they were masters at shaping and polishing their tools, and used different harder stone to bore the holes in their axe heads for handles. This must have been hard work which could take the whole of the winter. Imagine how often the axe head must have broken at the last minute, so they had to start all over again. The next thing these people discovered was how to make pots out of clay, which they soon learnt to decorate with patterns and fire over the ovens, although at this time in the late Stone Age they had stopped painting pictures of animals. In the end, perhaps 6,000 years ago, that is 4000 BC, they discovered a new and more convenient way of making tools. They discovered metals. Not all of them at once, of course. It began with some green stones which turned into copper when it melted into the fire. Copper has a nice shine, and you can use it to make arrowheads and axes, but it is soft and it gets blunt more quickly than stone. Once again, people found an answer. They discovered if you add just a little bit of another very rare metal, then it makes copper stronger. That metal is tin, and a mixture of tin and copper is called bronze. The age in which the people made themselves helmets and swords and axes and cauldrons and bracelets and necklaces out of bronze is naturally known as the Bronze Age. Now let's take a last look at the people dressed in skins as they paddle their boats made of hollowed-out tree trunks towards their villages and huts on stilts, bringing grain or perhaps salt from the mines in the mountains. They drink from splendid pottery vessels, and their wives and daughters wear jewelry made of colored stones and even gold. Do you think much has changed since then? They were people just like us, often unkind to one another, often cruel and deceitful. Sadly, so are we. But even then, a mother might sacrifice her life for her child, and friends might die for each other. No more, but also no less often than people do today. And how could it be otherwise? After all, we're only talking about things that happened between 3,000 and 10,000 years ago. There hasn't been enough time for us to change. So once in a while, when we are talking or eating some bread, using tools or warming ourselves by the fire, we should remember those early people with gratitude, for these were the greatest inventors of all time. Hey Mystica, we are doing something special tonight. I've lost about half of my raids, but this is actually... we were playing Hand of Fate earlier, and then I promised some story time tonight. So we are reading some chapters out of Ernst Gombrich's A Little History of the World. I'll ask some guys here. So we're going to be reading... so just answer your question here. I was going to do at least one more chapter. You guys want to hear Chapter 3, Land by the Nile? Oh, Mystica, this is a really good story. This is a children's book of history, so this is intended to be a nice general overview. I'll be honest, the prehistory stuff never did a lot for me, but The Enlightenment is possibly one of the favorite chapters that I've read recently. More? By the way, guys, I'm really sorry I haven't been reading chat. So let me just take a quick second to catch up. I'm seeing a lot of really nice comments from you guys, so thank you. I know I've been tripping over some of my words a little bit, but just give me a quick second to catch up. I think I need to not stumble over my voice as much. Who would buy audiobooks narrated by no? Oh my god, guys. Reading naughty books? I don't have any. Oh, no, that's not true. Actually, I do have some naughty poetry, so maybe that'll be a late night stream thing. Oh my god, you guys are making me blush. All right, I kind of ruined the history before history. That's right. All right, sorry, guys. I kind of ruined the mood here. So how is the, while I'm talking, guys, is the music distracting? Is it too quiet, too loud? I think I like the music personally, but all right. Chapter 3, The Land by the Nile. Here, as I promised, history begins with a when and a where. This is 3100 BC, that is 5,100 years ago, when, as we believe, a king named Menes was ruling over Egypt. If you want to know exactly where Egypt is, I suggest you ask a swallow. Every autumn, when it gets cold, swallows fly south, over the mountains to Italy and across a little stretch of sea, and then they're in Africa, in the part that lies nearest to Europe. Egypt is close by. In Africa, it is hot, and for months on end, it doesn't rain. In many regions, very little grows. There are deserts, as there are lands on either side of Egypt. Egypt also gets very little rain, but here they don't need it, because the Nile flows right through the middle of the country from one end to the other. Twice a year, when heavy rain filled its sources, the river would swell and burst its banks, flooding the whole land. Then people were forced to take boats to move along the houses and the palm trees. And when the waters withdrew, the earth was wonderfully drenched and rich with oozing mud. There, under the hot sun, the grain grew as it did nowhere else, which is why, from the earliest times, the Egyptians worshipped the Nile, as if it were God himself. Would you like to hear a hymn that they sang to the river 4,000 years ago? Glory be to thee, O Nile. You rise out of the earth and come to nourish Egypt. You water the plains and have the power to feed all the cattle. You quench the thirsty desert far from any water. You bring forth the barley. You create the wheat. You fill the granaries and the storehouses, not forgetting the poor. For you we pluck our harps. For you we sing. So sang the ancient Egyptians, and they were right. For thanks to the Nile, their land grew rich and powerful. Mightiest of all was their king. One king ruled over all the Egyptians, and the first to do so was King Menes. Do you remember when that was? It was in 3100 BC. And can you also remember, perhaps from Bible stories, what those kings of Egypt were called? They were called pharaohs. A pharaoh was immensely powerful. He lived in a great stone palace with massive pillars and in mighty courtyards, and his word was law. All the people of Egypt had to toil for him if he so decreed, and sometimes he did. One such pharaoh was King Cheops, who lived in about 2500 BC. He summoned all of his subjects to help construct his tomb. He wanted a building like a mountain, and he got it. You can still see it today. It's the Great Pyramid of Cheops. You may have seen pictures of it, but you still won't be able to imagine how big it is. A cathedral would fit comfortably inside. Clambering up its huge stone blocks, it's like scaling a mountain peak. And yet it was human beings who piled those gigantic stones on top of each other. They had no machines in those days, rollers or pulleys at the most. They had to pull and shove every single block by hand. Just think of it, in the heat of Africa. In this way, it seems, for 30 years, some 100,000 people toiled for the pharaoh whenever they weren't working in the fields. And when they grew tired, the king's overseer was sure to drive them on with his hippopotamus skin whip, as they dragged and heaved those immense loads, all for their king's tomb. Perhaps you're wondering why the pharaoh would want to build such a gigantic tomb. It was all a part of his religion. The Egyptians believed in many gods. Some had ruled over them as kings long ago, or at least that's what they thought, and among these kings were Osiris and his consort Isis. The sun god Ammon was a special god. In the kingdom of the dead, he had its own god, Anubis, and he had a jackal's head. Each pharaoh, they believed, was a son of the sun god, which explains why they feared him so much and obeyed all his commands. In honor of their gods, they chiseled majestic stone statues as tall as a 5-story house and built temples as big as towns. In front of the temples, they all set tall, pointed stones cut from a single block of granite. These are called obelisks, a Greek word meaning something like a little spear. In some of our own cities, you can still see obelisks that people brought back from Egypt. There's one in London, by the Thames. In the Egyptian religion, certain animals were sacred. Cats, for example. Other gods were represented in animal form. The creature known as the Sphinx, which has a human's head on a lion's body, and was a very powerful god. Its statue near the pyramids is so vast that a whole temple would fit inside. Buried from time to time by the desert sands, the Sphinx has now been guarding the tombs of the pharaohs for more than 5,000 years. Who can say how long it will continue to keep watch? And yet the most important part of Egypt's strange religion was their belief that, though a man's soul left his body when he died, for some reason that soul went on needing that body and would suffer if it crumbled to dust. So they invented a very ingenious way of preserving bodies of the dead. They rubbed them with ointments and juices of certain plants and bandaged them with long strips of cloth so that they wouldn't decay. A body preserved in this manner is called a mummy. And today, after thousands of years, these mummies are still intact. A mummy is placed in a coffin made of wood, and that wooden coffin in one of stone. And the stone one is buried, not in the earth, but in the stone that was chiseled out of the rock. If you were rich and powerful, like King Cheops, son of the sun, a whole stone mountain would be made for your tomb. Deep inside, the mummy would be safe, or so they thought. But the mighty king's efforts were in vain. His pyramid is empty. But the mummies of other kings and those those of many ancient Egyptians have been found undisturbed in their tombs. A tomb was intended to be a dwelling for the soul when it returned to visit its body. For this reason, they put food and furniture and clothes, and there are lots of paintings on the walls showing scenes from the life of the departed. His portrait was in there too, to make sure that when the soul came on the visit, it wouldn't go to the wrong tomb. Thanks to these great stone statues and the wonderfully bright and vivid wall paintings, you have a very good idea of what life in ancient Egypt was like. True, these paintings do not show things as we see them. An object or a person that is behind another is generally shown on top, and the figures often look stiff. Bodies are shown from the front and the hands and the feet on the side, so that they look as if they had been ironed flat. But the Egyptians knew what they were doing. Every detail is clear. How they used great nets to catch ducks on the Nile, and how they paddled their boats and fished with long spears. Thank you for the follow, Joshy. Sorry, I probably should have disabled. The alerts. All right, I lost my place for that, guys. Sorry, I'm just going to catch back. Thanks to the giant stone statues and the wonderfully bright and vivid wall paintings, we have a very good idea of what life in ancient Egypt was like. True, these paintings do not show things as we see them. An object or a person is behind another and generally shown on top, and the figures often look stiff. Bodies are shown from the front and the hands and feet on the side, so they look as if they'd been ironed flat. But the Egyptians knew what they were doing. Every detail is clear, how they used great nets to catch ducks on the Nile, how they paddled their boats and fished with long spears, how they pumped water into ditches to irrigate the fields, and how they drove their crows and goats to pasture, how they threshed again and made shoes and clothes, blew glass, for they could already do that, and how they shaped bricks and built houses. And we can also see girls playing catch, or playing music on flutes, and soldiers going off to war, or returning with loot and foreign captives, such as black Africans. In noblemen's tombs, we can see emissaries arriving from abroad, laden with tribute, and the king rewarding faithful ministers with decorations. Some pictures show the long-dead noblemen at prayer, their arms raised before the statues of their gods, or holding banquets in their houses, with singers plucking harps and clowns performing somersaults. Next to these brightly colored paintings, you will see lots of tiny pictures and all sorts of things, such as owls and little people, flags, flowers, tents, beetles, vases, together with zigzag lines, and spirals all jumbled up together. Whatever can they be? They aren't pictures. They're hieroglyphs, or sacred signs, the Egyptian form of writing. The Egyptians were immensely proud of their writing. Indeed, they were almost in awe of it. In all professions, of all of the professions, the scribe was the most highly esteemed. Would you like to know how to write using hieroglyphs? In fact, learning this side of writing must have been incredibly hard, as it's much like constructing a picture puzzle. If you wanted to write the name of a god Osiris, then you would draw a throne, which was pronounced Os, and an I, which is pronounced Iri, so that together they made Us-Iri. And to make sure that no one thought it meant throne eye, they often threw a little flag like this beside it. This means that a person was a god, in the same way that the Christians used to draw a cross after a name if they wanted to show that that person was dead. So now you know how to write Osiris in hieroglyphs. But think what a job it must have been to decipher all that Egyptian writing when people became interested in hieroglyphs again, 200 years ago. In fact, they were only able to decipher them because a stone had been found on which the same words were written in 3 scripts: ancient Greek, hieroglyphs, and another ancient Egyptian script. It was still a tremendous puzzle, and great scholars devoted their lives to it. You can see that stone. It's called the Rosetta Stone in the British Museum in London. We are now able to read almost everything that the Egyptians wrote, not just on the walls of palaces and temples, but also in books, though the books are no longer very legible. For the ancient Egyptians did have books, even that long ago. Of course, they weren't made of paper like ours, but they were made of a certain type of reed that grows on the banks of the Nile. The Greek name for these reeds is papyrus, from which our name for paper comes. They wrote over long strips of this papyrus, which was then rolled up into scrolls. A whole heap of these scrolls has survived. And when we read them, we discover just how wise and clever those ancient Egyptians really were. Would you like to hear a saying written more than 5,000 years ago? But you must listen and think about it very carefully. Wise words are rarer than emeralds, yet they come from the mouths of poor slave girls who turn the millstones. Because the Egyptians were so wise and powerful, their empire lasted a very long time, longer than any empire the world has ever known, nearly 3,000 years, and they took just as much care as they did with and they took just as much care as they did with their corpses when they preserved them from rotting away, and preserving all their ancient traditions over the centuries. Their priests made quite sure that no son ever did anything his father had not done before him. To them, everything old was sacred. Only rarely in the course of time did people ever turn against this strict conformity. Once was shortly after the reign of King Cheops, about 2100 BC, when people tried to change everything. They rose up in rebellion against the pharaoh, killed his ministers, and dragged the mummies from their tombs. Those who formerly didn't even own sandals now hold treasures, and those who once wore precious robes now go about in rags, the ancient papyrus tells us. The land is turning like a potter's wheel. But in the end, it did not last long, and soon everything was as strict before, if not more so. On another occasion, it was a pharaoh himself who tried to change everything. Akhenaten was a remarkable man who lived around 1370 BC. He had no time for Egyptian religion, and with its many gods and mysterious rituals, there is only one God, he taught the people, and that is the sun, through whose rays all is created and sustained. To him alone you must pray. The ancient temples were shut down, and King Akhenaten and his wife moved into a new palace. Since he was so utterly opposed to tradition and in favor of fine new ideas, he also had the walls of his palace painted in an entirely new style, one that was no longer so severe, rigid and solemn, but freer and more natural. However, this didn't please the people at all. They wanted everything to look as it had thousands of years. And so as soon as Akhenaten was dead, they brought back all of the old customs and the old style of art. So everything stayed as it had been, for as long as the Egyptian empire endured. Just as in the days of King Menes, for nearly 3.5 more centuries, people continued to put mummies into tombs, write in hieroglyphs, and pray to the same gods. They even went on worshipping cats as sacred animals. And if you ask me, I think in this at least, the ancient Egyptians were right. All right. That is chapter 3, so let me just thank the people who gave some follows. Mystica, thank you very much. This is definitely very unusual for the stream, so thank you for the support for that. Let me just catch up with chat. I will ask you guys, do you want... I am eventually going to put an end to this, but at this point we've gone past the time that I can do... I will still do a host at the end of this, but I'm willing to do more if you guys want to hear more. So I will take a minute to catch up with chat. Let me know if you want another chapter. And I think I have another in me as long as I can get something to drink. So I'll catch up with chat. I'll get myself a little bit of refreshment. And in that time, that will give some consensus as to whether or not people want me to keep going. All right, guys. You asked for it. Let me just catch up on my drinking. If I can make it to ancient Greek, I'll be really happy, but I have a feeling... Well... Okay, I have a spot where I think I might not be able to make it to this spot, but there's actually a really great breaking point for history, so... 8-hour downtime. Guess you have to sleep. All right. Well, Mystica, thank you very much for hanging out. We're going to keep reading. I'm not going to ask chat again for the... I'm not going to ask chat again for continuing chapters. I'm going to assume that you want to keep reading more. And then if you guys... By the way, thank you very much for that host, Jazzpoo. So what I'm going to do for you guys, I will keep reading as far as I can. And if you guys are done, just let me know. And... I can stop, but I think I've got a good breaking point here, so. And I got the feeling that the music level was all right, so I'm just going to keep going. Chapter 4, Sunday, Monday. There are 7 days in a week. I don't need to tell you their names because you know them already. But have you any idea where and when it was that the days were each given a name? Or who first had the idea of arranging them into weeks so that they no longer flew past, nameless and in no order, as they did for people in prehistoric times? It wasn't in Egypt, but in another country which is no less hot, but where, instead of just one river, there were two, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And it was because the important part of that country lay between the two rivers, it is called Mesopotamia, which is Greek for the land between the rivers. Mesopotamia is not in Africa, but in Asia, though it is still not so very far from our part of the world, in a region called the Middle East, in a country that we now know as Iraq. The Tigris and the Euphrates join together and then flow out into the Persian Gulf. Picture a vast plain crossed by these two rivers, a land of heat and a swamp of sudden floods. Here and there tall hills rise out of the plain, but if you dig into them, then you'll find that they aren't hills at all. First, you'll come across a lot of bricks and rubble. And when you dig deeper, you'll meet stout, high walls. For these hills are really ruined towns and great cities laid out with long, straight streets, tall houses and palaces and temples. But unlike Egypt's stone temples and pyramids, they were built with sun-baked bricks into which cracked and crumbled over time, and eventually collapsed into the great mounds of rubble. One such mound, standing in the desert, is all that remains of Babylon, once the greatest city on the earth, a city swarming with people who came there from every part of the world to trade their wares. Upstream, at the foot of the mountains, sits another. This was Nineveh, the second greatest city in the land. Babylon was the capital of the Babylonians. That's easy enough to remember. Nineveh, that of the Assyrians. Unlike Egypt, Mesopotamia was rarely ruled by just one king, nor did any single empire survive long enough with firm frontiers. Many tribes and many kings held power at different times. The most important of these were the Sumerians, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians. For a long time, it was as though the Egyptians were the first people to have everything that goes... For a long time, it was as though the Egyptians were the first people to have anything that goes to make up what we call a culture. Towns and tradesmen, noblemen and kings, temples and priests, administrators and artists, writing and technical skills. Yet we now know that in some respects the Sumerians were ahead of the Egyptians. Excavations of rubble mounds on plains near the Persian Gulf have revealed that the people living there had already learned how to shape bricks from clay and build houses and temples by 3100 BC. Deep inside one of the largest of these mounds were found the ruins of the city of Ur, where, so the Bible tells us, Abraham was born. A great number of tombs were also found that appeared to date from the same time as Cheops' Great Pyramid in Egypt. But while the pyramid was empty, these tombs were packed with the most astonishing treasures. Dazzling golden headdresses and gold vessels for sacrifices, gold helmets and gold daggers set with semi-precious stones, magnificent harps decorated with bulls' heads, and if you would believe it, a game board, beautifully crafted and patterned like a chessboard. The explorer who found these treasures took many of them to England, where you can see them in the British Museum. Others are in the University of Pennsylvania and the Museum of Baghdad in Iraq. They also found round seals and inscribed clay tablets in those tombs. However, the inscriptions were not in hieroglyphs, but in a totally different form of script that was, if anything, even harder to decipher. This was because the pictures had been replaced by neatly incised single strokes ending in a small triangle or wedge. This script is called cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped. Books made of papyrus were unknown to the Mesopotamians. They inscribed these signs into tablets of soft clay, which were then baked into the hard ovens. Huge numbers of these ancient tablets have been found, some recounting long and wonderful stories, such as that of the hero Gilgamesh and his battles with monsters and dragons. On other tablets, kings boast of their deeds, and the temples that they've built for all eternity, and the nations that they have conquered. There are also tablets which merchants recorded their business dealings, contracts, receipts, and inventories of goods. And thanks to these, we know that even before the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the ancient Sumerians were already great traders. Their merchants could calculate with ease and plainly knew the difference between what was lawful and what was not. One of the first Babylonian kings to rule over the whole region left a long and important inscription engraved in stone. It is the oldest law book in the world and is known as the Code of Hammurabi. His name may sound as if it comes from a storybook, but there's nothing fanciful about his laws. They are strict and just, so it is worth remembering when King Hammurabi lived, around 1700 BC, that is, some 3,700 years ago. The Babylonians and the Assyrians after them were disciplined and hard-working, but they didn't paint cheerful pictures like the Egyptians. Most of their statues and reliefs show kings out hunting or inspecting kneeling captives bound in chains, or foreign tribespeople fleeing before the wheels of their chariots and warriors attacking fortresses. Their kings look forbidding and have long black ringlets and rippling beards. They are also sometimes shown making sacrifices to Baal, the sun god, or to the moon goddess, Ishtar or Astara. For both the Babylonians and the Assyrians worshipped the sun or the moon and also the stars. On clear, warm nights throughout the year and over the centuries, they observed and recorded everything they saw in the skies. And because they were intelligent, they noticed that the stars revolved in a regular way. They soon learnt to recognize that those that seemed fixed to the vault of heaven, reappearing each night in the same place. And they saw shapes in the constellations and gave them names, just as we do when we speak of the Great Bear. But the stars which seemed to move over the vault of heaven, now say towards the Great Bear, now towards the scales, were the ones that interested them the most. In those days, people thought that the earth was a flat disk, and that the sky was a sort of hollow sphere cupped over the earth, that turned over it once each day. So it must have seemed miraculous to them that, although most of the stars stayed fixed in the heavens, some seemed, as it were, only loosely fastened and able to move about. Today we know that these stars are close to us, and that they turn with the earth around the sun. They are called planets. But the ancient Babylonians and Assyrians couldn't know that, so they thought some strange magic must lie behind it. They gave a name to each wandering star and observed them constantly, convinced that they were powerful beings whose positions influenced the destinies of men, and that by studying them they would be able to predict the future. This belief in the stars has a Greek name, astrology. Some planets were believed to bring good luck, others misfortune. Mars meant war, Venus love. To each of the 5 planets known to them, they dedicated a day, and with the sun and the moon, that made 7. This was the origin of our 7-day week. In English, we still say Saturn, Saturn Day, Sunday, and Moon Day. But as the other days are named after different gods. In other languages, such as French or Italian, most of the days of the week still belong to the planets that the Babylonians first named. Would you ever have guessed that our weekdays had such a strange and venerable history reaching back all those thousands of years? To be nearer to their stars, and also to see them better in the misty land, the Babylonians and the Sumerians before them erected strange buildings and with wonderful names. Ziggurats. Those are tall, broad towers made up of terraces piled on top of one another with formidable ramps and steep, narrow staircases. Right at the very top was a temple dedicated to the moon, or to the other planets. People came from far and wide to ask the priests to read their fortunes in the stars, and brought offerings of great value. These half-ruined ziggurats can still be seen today, poking out of the rubble mounds with inscriptions telling how this or that king built and restored them. The earliest kings of the region lived as long ago as 3000 BC, and the last around 550 BC. The last great Babylonian king was Nebuchadnezzar. He lived around 600 BC and is remembered for his feats of war. He fought against Egypt and brought a vast number of foreign captains home to Babylon as slaves, and yet his truly greatest deeds were not in his wars. He had huge canals and water systems dug in order to retain the water and irrigate the land so that it became rich and fertile. Only when those canals became blocked with silt and the cisterns filled with mud did that land become what it is today, a desert wasteland, a marshy plain with here or there only one of those hills that I mentioned. And so whenever we are glad that this week is nearly over and whenever we are glad that the week is nearly over and Sunday is coming around again, we must spare a thought for those hills of rubble in those hot and marshy plains, and for the fierce kings with their long black beards, for we now know how it all fits together. Chapter 5. The One and Only God. Between Egypt and Mesopotamia, there is a land of deep valleys and rich pastures. There, for thousands of years, herdsmen tended to their flocks. They planted vines and cereals, and in evenings they sang songs as country people do. But because it lay between those two countries, first it would have been conquered and ruled by the Egyptians, and then the Babylonians would invade, so that the people who lived there were constantly being driven from one place to another. They built themselves towns and fortresses to no avail. They were still not strong enough to resist the mighty armies of their neighbors. That's all very sad, but I can't see what this has to do with history, you say. For the same thing must have happened to thousands of small tribes. And you're right. But there was something special about this one, because, small and defenseless though they were, they didn't just become part of history, they made history. And by that I mean they shaped the course of all history to come. And this special something was their religion. All the other peoples prayed to many gods. You remember Isis and Osiris, Baal and Astera. But these herdsmen only prayed to one god, their own special protector and leader. And when they sat beside their campfires in the evening, they sang songs about their deeds and their battles. They sang of his deeds and his battles. Their god, they sang, was better and stronger and more exalted than all the other gods the heathen put together. Indeed, they insisted, as the years went by, that he was the only god that there was. The one and only God, creator of heaven and earth, sun and moon, land and river, plant and beast, and of mankind as well. It was he who raged furiously against them in the storm, but he never abandoned his people. Not when they were persecuted by the Egyptians, nor when they were carried off by the Babylonians. For that was their faith and their pride. They were his people, and he was their God. You may have already guessed who these strange and powerless herdsmen were. They were the Jews, and their songs and their deeds were the deeds of their God. And the songs of their deeds, which are the deeds of their God, are the Old Testament of the Bible. One day, but there's no hurry, you may come to read the Bible. Nowhere else will you find so many stories about ancient times told so vividly. And if you read them carefully, you may find that you now understand many of them better. There's a story of Abraham, for example. Do you remember where he came from? The answer is in the book of Genesis, chapter 11. He came from Ur, in the Chaldees. Ur, that mound of rubble near the Persian Gulf, where they dug up all those ancient things like harps and game boards and weapons and jewelry. But Abraham didn't live there in the earliest times. He was probably alive at the time of Hammurabi, the great lawgiver, which is, as you remember, around 1700 BC. And many of Hammurabi's strict and just laws turn up again in the Bible. But that isn't all the Bible has to say about ancient Babylon. Do you know the great story of the Tower of Babel? When the people of a great city tried to build a tower that would reach up to heaven, and God was angry at their pride and stopped them building any higher by making them all speak different languages so they could no longer understand one another? Well, Babel is in Babylon. So now you are able to understand the story better. For as you know, the Babylonians really did build gigantic towns at the top of which reached even to the heavens, and they built them so as to be nearer to the sun, the moon, and the stars. The story of Noah and the flood is also set in Mesopotamia, and a number of clay tablets have been dug up, inscribed with cuneiform script, telling the story that is very similar to the one in the Bible. One of Abraham's descendants, the Bible tells us, was Joseph, son of Jacob, whose brother took him to Egypt and sold him, despite which he became a counselor and a minister to the Pharaoh. You may know how the story goes, how there was a famine throughout the land, and how Joseph's brothers traveled to Egypt to buy corn. At that time, the pyramids were already over 1,000 years old, and Joseph and his brothers must have marveled at them, just as we do today. Rather than return to their own country, Joseph's brothers and their children settled in Egypt, and before long had to toil for the pharaohs as the Egyptians did at the time of the pyramids. In the first chapter of Exodus we read, "And the Egyptians had made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage and mortar and in brick." In the end, Moses led them out of Egypt into the desert, probably around 1250 BC. From there, they tried to win back the Promised Land, that is, the land which their ancestors had lived since the time of Abraham. And finally, after long, cruel, and bloody battles, they succeeded. So now they had their own small kingdom, with its capital, Jerusalem. The first king was Saul, who fought against a neighboring tribe, the Philistines, and died on the battlefield. The Bible has lots of good stories about the next kings, King David and King Solomon. Solomon was a wise and just king who ruled soon after 1000 BC, which is about 700 years after King Hammurabi and 2100 years after King Menes. He built the first temple of Jerusalem, although his architects weren't Jews, but foreign artisans from neighboring lands. It was as large and as splendid as any built by the Egyptians or the Babylonians, but in one respect it was different. Deep inside the heathen temples there were images of Anubis with his jackal's head, or of Baal, to whom even human sacrifices were made. Whereas the innermost part of the Jewish temple, the Holy of Holies, there was no image at all, for of the God whose first appearance in the history of the world was to the people of the Jews, God the Almighty, the one and only God, no image could or might be made. All that there was were the tablets of the laws with their 10 commandments, and these God had represented himself. After Solomon's reign, things went less well for the Jews. Their kingdom split in two, the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. Many battles followed, at the end of which one half, the kingdom of Israel, was invaded by the Assyrians in 722 and was conquered and destroyed. Yet what is so remarkable is that the effect of so many disasters on the Jews who survived them was only to make them even more devout. Men arose among them, not priests, but simple people who felt compelled to speak to the people because God spoke through them. The sermon was always the same. You yourselves are the cause of your misfortunes. God is punishing you for your sins. Through the words of the prophets, the Jewish people heard again and again that suffering was God's way of punishing them and testing their faith, and that one day salvation would come in the form of the Messiah, their Savior, who would restore their people to the former glory and bring unending joy. But their suffering was still far from over. You will remember the mighty Babylon warrior and ruler, King Nebuchadnezzar. On his way to the war with the Egyptians, he marched through the Promised Land, where he destroyed the city of Jerusalem in 586 BC, put out the eyes of King Zedekiah, and led the Jews into captivity in Babylon. There they remained for nearly 50 years until, in its turn, the Babylonian Empire was destroyed by its Persian neighbor in 538 BC. When the Jews returned to their homeland, they had changed. They were different from the surrounding tribes and saw them all as idol worshippers who had failed to recognize the one true God. So they kept themselves apart and had nothing to do with their neighbors. It was at this time that the Old Testament was first written down as we know it today, 2,500 years later. To those around them, however, it was the Jews who seemed odd, if not ridiculous, with their ceaseless talk of a unique and invisible God, and their strict observance of the most tiresome and inflexible rules and practices ordained by a God whom no one could see. And if the Jews had been the first to distance themselves from other tribes, it was not long before those others were taking even greater care to avoid the Jews, that tiny remnant of a people who called itself chosen, who pored night and day over their sacred songs and scriptures as they tried to understand why the one and only God allowed his people to suffer so. Chapter 6, Icanread. How do you do it? Why, every schoolgirl knows the answer. You spell out the words. Yes, that's right, but what exactly do you mean? Well, there's an I, which makes I, and then a C, and an A, and an N, which spells can, and so on. With 26 letters, you can write about anything. Anything? Yes, anything. Excuse me. In any language? Just about. Isn't that amazing? With 26 simple signs, each no more than a couple of squiggles, you can write down anything you like, be it wise or silly, angelic or wicked. It wasn't anything as easy for the ancient Egyptians with their hieroglyphs, nor was it for the people who used the cuneiform script, for they kept on inventing new signs which didn't stand for just single-letter sounds, but for whole syllables or more. The idea that each sign must represent one sound, and that just 26 of those signs were all that you needed to write down every conceivable word, was a wholly new invention, one that can only have been made by people who did a lot of writing, not just sacred texts and songs, but all sorts of letters, contracts, and receipts. These inventors were merchants, men who traveled far and wide across the seas, bartering and trading in every land. They lived quite near the Jews in the ports of Tyre and Sidon, cities much larger and more powerful than Jerusalem, and quite as noisy and bustling as Babylon. And in fact, their language and their religion were not unlike those of the people of Mesopotamia, though they didn't share their love of war. The Phoenicians, for this was the name of the people of Tyre and Sidon, made their conquests by other means. They sailed across the seas to unknown shores, where they landed and set up trading posts. The wild tribes living there brought them furs and precious stones in exchange for tools, cooking pots, and colored cloth, for Phoenician craftsmanship was known throughout the world. Indeed, their artisans had even helped in the construction of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. Most popular of all their goods was their dyed cloth, especially the purple, which they sold throughout the world. Many Phoenicians stayed in their trading posts on foreign shores and built towns. Everywhere they went, they were welcomed, in Africa and Spain and southern Italy, on account of the beautiful things that they brought. Now, did they ever feel cut off from home because they could write letters to their friends in Tyre and Nor did they ever feel cut off from home because they could write letters to their friends in Tyre and Sidon using wonderful script that they had invented, which we still use today. It's true. Take B, for example. It is almost identical to the one used by the ancient Phoenicians 3,000 years ago. When they wrote home from distant shores, sending news to their families in those noisily bustling harbor towns. Now you know this. You'll be sure not to forget the Phoenicians. Heroes and their weapons. Chapter 7. Here are some lines to be chanted aloud while tapping their rhythm. Lines that were used by the poets of Greece in their stories of warfare, telling the contests of good gods and heroes in the earlier ages. Verses like this, with 6 beats to each line, were called hexameters by the Greeks. The rhythm suits the Greek language, but it sounds a little unnatural in English. You will have heard of the war that arose when Paris the Trojan sided with Venus and gave her the apple of gold in the contest. How as a reward she helped him seize the beautiful Helen, wife of the king of the Greeks, Menelaus the caller in battle. How the army of Greeks laid siege to the city of Troy to regain her. With Agamemnon and Nestor the sage, Achilles and Ajax, and countless heroes who fought in that war with the sons of King Priam, Paris and Hector for 10 long summers and winters before the city was last conquered and razed to the ground by the victors. Do you also remember the tale of wily Odysseus, how returning from Troy he experienced the strangest adventures, till at last, on miraculous ships, he returned to his homeland, to the wife who awaited her lord all the years of his absence. Verses like these were chanted at feasts by Greek minstrels as they played their lyres. Later they were written down, and people came to believe that one poet, called Homer, had composed them all. They are read to this day, and you too can enjoy them, for they are as fresh and vivid as ever, full of beauty and wisdom. Now wait a minute, you're going to say. These are stories, not history. What I want to know is, when and how did these events take place? A German businessman called Schliemann asked himself that same question more than 100 years ago. He read Homer over and over again, and longed to see the beautiful places described by the poet. If only he could hold his hands just once if only he could hold in his hands just once those wonderful weapons with which those heroes fought. And one day he did. For it turned out that it was all true. Not in every detail, of course, for the heroes named in those songs were no more real than the giants and witches in fairy tales. But the world that Homer describes, the drinking cups, the weapons, the buildings, the ships, the princes who are at the same time shepherds, and the heroes who are also sea raiders, were not inventions. When Schliemann told the people, they laughed at him, but he didn't give up. He kept just putting aside money so that one day he could go to Greece and see for himself. And when he finally raised enough money, he hired laborers to set about digging in search for all of the cities mentioned in Homer. At Mycenae, he discovered the palaces and tombs of kings, armor and shields, just as the Homeric songs had described them. And he found Troy too, as he dug there. And it turned out that they really had been destroyed by a fire. But in all those tombs and palaces, there wasn't one inscription, so that for a long time nobody could have put a date to them, until one day, quite by chance, a ring was found in Mycenae that didn't come from there. On it, in hieroglyphs, it was the name of an Egyptian king who had lived around 1400 BC and had been the predecessor of Akhenaten, the great reformer. Now at this time there was living in Greece and on many neighboring islands and shores a warlike people who had amassed great treasures. Greece was not so much a kingdom as a collection of small fortified cities, and each with its own palace and king. These people were mostly seafarers. Like Phoenicians, they traded, but fought more. They were often at war with one another, but on occasion they would gang together to plunder other shores. And as their fortunes grew bigger, they grew bolder. And not just bolder, but braver, because to be a sea raider takes courage as well as cunning. So sea raiding was a task which fell to the nobility, and the rest of the population were simple peasants and shepherds. Now, unlike the Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians, these noblemen weren't interested in preserving the ways of their ancestors. Their many raids and battles with foreign peoples had opened their eyes to new ideas and then taught them to relish variety and change. It was at this point and in this part of the world that history begins to progress at a much greater speed, because people no longer believed that the old ways were best. From now on, they were constantly changing, and this is why nowadays, when we find even a fragment of pottery in Greece, or anywhere else in Europe, we can say this dates from roughly this or that period. Because 100 years later, a pot like that would have gone out of fashion. Nobody would have wanted it. It is now thought that all the beautiful things that Schliemann found in his excavations of Greek cities, the fine vessels and daggers decorated with hunting scenes, the gold shields and helmets and jewelry, and even the colorful paintings on the walls, on the halls, were not invented there. They were first made not in Greece or Troy, but on a nearby island. This island is called Crete. There, at the time of King Hammurabi, you remember when that was? The Cretans had already built splendid royal palaces with innumerable rooms, staircases running up and down in all directions, great pillars, courtyards, corridors, and cellars. A veritable labyrinth. Mystica, I am trying to read chat a little bit. Speaking of labyrinths, have you ever heard the story of the evil Minotaur, half man, half bull, who lived in a labyrinth that made the Greeks send out 7 youths and 7 maidens each year to make human sacrifices? Do you know where it was? It was in Crete, so there may be some truth to the story. Cretan kings may once have ruled over Greek cities, and those Greeks may have had to send them tribute. In any event, those Cretans were clearly remarkable people, even if we still don't know much about them. You only have to look at the paintings on the walls of their palaces to see that they are unlike any of the ones made at the time of Egypt or in Babylon. If you remember, the Egyptian pictures were very beautiful, but rather severe and stiff, a bit like their priests. This is not the case in Crete. What mattered most to them was to catch animals or people in rapid motion, hounds chasing wild boar and people leaping over bulls. Nothing was too hard to get them to paint. The kings in the Greek cities clearly learned a great deal from them. But by 1200 BC, this time of splendor was over, for it was around this time, some 200 years before the reign of King Solomon, that new tribes came down from the north. Whether they were related to the former builders of Mycenae, nobody knows for sure, but is likely. In any event, they drove out the kings and installed themselves in their place. Meanwhile, Crete had been destroyed, but the memory of its magnificence lived on in the minds of the invaders, and when they founded new cities and built their own shrines. And as the centuries went by, the tales of the kings of ancient Mycenae had become confused with those of their own battles and conquests, until it became a part of their own histories. These newcomers were the Greeks, and the myths and songs sung in their courts and of their nobles were the very same Homeric poems with which this chapter began. It's worth remembering when that they were composed shortly after about 800 BC. When the Greeks came to Greece, they were not yet Greeks. Does that sound strange? Yet it is true. For the fact is, when the tribes from the north first invaded the lands they were to occupy, they weren't yet a unified people. They spoke different dialects and were obedient to different chieftains. They were tribes rather like the Sioux or the Mohicans that you read about in the stories of the Wild West, and had such names as the Dorians, the Ionians, and the Aeolians. Like the American Indians, they were very warlike and brave, but in other ways they were quite different. The Native Americans were familiar with iron, while people of Mycenae and Crete, just like the songs of Homer tell us, had weapons made of bronze. And so these tribes arrived with their wives and their children. The Dorians pushed farthest, right down to the southernmost tip of Greece, which looks like a maple leaf and is called the Peloponnese. They were subdued by the inhabitants and set them to work in the fields. They themselves founded a city where they lived and called it Sparta. The Ionians who arrived after the Dorians found that there was not enough room for all of them in Greece. Many of them settled above the maple leaf, to the north of its stalk, on a peninsula called Attica. They made their homes by the sea and planted vines, cereals, and olive trees. And they too founded a city, which they dedicated to the goddess Athena. She who, as in the Homeric songs, so often came to the rescue of Ulysses the sailor. That city is called Athens. Like all the members of the Ionian tribe, the Athenians were great seafarers, and in due course they took possession of a number of small islands, known since that time as the Ionian Islands. Later they went even further, and found cities far across the sea, away from Greece, along the fertile coast of Asia Minor, with its many sheltering bays. No sooner did the Phoenicians hear of these cities than they sailed there to trade, and the Greeks will have sold them olive oil and cereals, as well as silver and other metals found in those regions. But they soon learned so much from the Phoenicians that they too sailed onwards, to distant shores where they founded their own outposts, or colonies as we call them. And the Phoenicians passed on to them their wonderful way of writing using letters. You shall see what they made of it. So let you guys know that the last chapter is coming up, chapter 8, but I'm just going to take a minute to catch up on chat. Because I know I've been stumbling a little bit, but there's also been a lot of dialogue, so let me just catch here. A lot of talk about muffins. By the way, thank you very much for the follow, Joshi and Mystic. I'm sorry I have not been as responsive to chat, but it's a little hard to break up the narrative. Thank you, Jaspu. Yeah, if you guys try to make me laugh, it's gonna ruin the story. Okay, so I'm just gonna get a little bit of gonna let my voice relax a little bit. What do you guys think of this book so far, by the way? It's an awesome book. You want to read it to your kids someday? Or you can give them a recording of me reading it to them. Best book ever because of the voice. I can read you some of the dirty poetry later. All right, guys. Chapter 8, An Unequal Struggle. Something very strange happened between 550 and 500 BC. I don't really understand it myself, but perhaps that's what makes it so interesting. In the high mountain chain that runs north of Mesopotamia, a wild mountain tribe had long been living. They had a beautiful religion. They worshipped light and the sun, and they believed in a state of constant warfare with the dark. That is, with the dark powers of evil. Oh, excuse me. These mountain people were the Persians. For hundreds of years they had been dominated, first by the Assyrians, then by the Babylonians. One day they had enough. Their ruler was a man of an exceptional courage and intelligence called Cyrus, who was no longer prepared to put up with the oppression of his people. He led his band of horsemen down onto the plain of Babylon. The Babylonians looked down from their mighty ramparts and laughed at the little band of warriors that dared attack their city. Yet under Cyrus's leadership they succeeded, through courage and guile, and so Cyrus became the lord of that great realm. His first act was to free all the peoples held in captivity by the Babylonians. Among them were the Jews, who went home to Jerusalem. That was, you will remember, in 538 BC. Not content with his great kingdom, however, Cyrus marched on to conquer Egypt, only to die on the way. But his son, Cambyses, succeeded. Egypt fell and the pharaoh was deposed, and that was the end of the Egyptian Empire, which had lasted almost 3,000 years. And with its end, that little Persian tribe became master of nearly all the known world. But only nearly. They hadn't yet swallowed up Greece. That was still to come. It came after the death of Cambyses, during the reign of the great king named Darius. He governed the vast Persian Empire, which now stretched from Egypt to the frontiers of India, in such a way that nothing happened anywhere that he himself had not decreed. He built roads so that his orders might be carried without delay to the furthest parts of his kingdom. And even his highest officials, the satraps, were spied on by informers known as the king's eyes and ears. Darius now began to expand his empire into Asia Minor, along whose coasts lay the cities of the Ionian Greeks. Now the Greeks were not used to being part of a great empire, with a ruler who sent orders from God knows where in the heart of Asia, expecting an instant obedience. Many of the people who lived in the Greek colonies were rich merchants, used to running their own affairs and making their own decisions about the administration of their cities, jointly and independently. They had no wish to be ruled by a Persian king, nor would they pay him tribute, so they rebelled and threw out the Persian governors. In this, they were supported by the Greeks in the motherland, the original founders of the colonies, and in particular by the Athenians, who had sent them ships. Never before had the king of Persia, the king of kings, for that was his title, had been so insulted. That led this magnificent tribe, these nobodies, would dare to challenge him, the ruler of the world. He dealt with the Ionian cities in Asia Minor in less than no time, but he wasn't finished yet. He was furious with the Athenians for meddling in his affairs. With the aim of destroying Athens and conquering Greece, he equipped a large fleet, but his ships were caught in a violent storm, dashed against the cliffs and sunk. At this his anger knew no bounds, and the story goes that he appointed a slave to call out 3 times at every meal, "Sire, remember the Athenians!" So great was his fury. And then he sent his son-in-law with a new and mighty fleet to sail against Athens. They conquered many islands on their way and destroyed a lot of cities. They finally dropped anchor not far from Athens, at a place called Marathon. There the whole great Persian army disembarked, ready to march on Athens. It is said that they numbered 70,000 men, as many as the entire population of Athens. With roughly 10,000 soldiers, the Athenian army was outnumbered 7-1. Their fate was surely sealed. But not quite. For the Athenians had a general named Miltiades, a brave and able man who had lived for many years among the Persians and knew their fighting tactics. Added to which, the Athenians all knew what was at stake, their freedom and their lives, and those of their wives and their children. So there at Marathon they formed ranks and fell upon the Persians, and there they were victorious. The Persians suffered heavy losses, and those remaining took their ships and fled. Such a victory, and against such odds! Others in his place might have thought of nothing but celebration, but Miltiades was shrewd as well as brave. He had noted that instead of sailing back the way that they had come, the Persian ships had turned towards Athens, which lay undefended and open to attack. But as luck would have it, the distance from Marathon to Athens was greater by sea than by land, for the ships had to negotiate a long split of land, easily crossed on foot. This Miltiades did. He sent a messenger ahead, who was to run as fast as he could to warn the Athenians. This was the famous Marathon run, after which we call our race. Famous because the messenger ran so far and so fast that all he could do was deliver his message before he fell down dead. Meanwhile, Miltiades and his army had taken the same route, marching with tremendous haste. And this was just as well, for no sooner had they reached the harbor at Athens than the Persian fleet appeared over the horizon. But there was no more fighting. At the sight of their heroic army, the disheartened Persians turned tail and sailed home. And not just Athens, but the whole of Greece was saved. This was 490 BC. How great Darius, king of kings, must have cursed when he learned about the defeat at Marathon. But at this time there was little he could do about Greece, for a revolt had broken out in Egypt, which had to be suppressed, and he died soon after, leaving his son and his successor, Xerxes, to take revenge on Greece once and for all. I don't actually have the hiccups. How great King Darius, Xerxes was a hard and ambitious man, needed no urging. He assembled a great army amongst his subject peoples in his empire. Dressed in their traditional costumes with their weapons, their bows and arrows and shields and swords and lances and war chariots and slings, they were a vast and swirling multitude, said by some to number more than 1,000,000 men. What hope had the Greeks in face of such a host? This time Xerxes himself took command. But when the Persians tried to cross the narrow neck of the sea which separates Asia Minor from today's Istanbul, on a bridge made of boats, rough waves tore the bridge apart. In his fury, Xerxes had the waves lashed with chains. But I doubt the sea took any notice. One part of this gigantic army attacked Greece by sea, while another part marched overland. In Northland Greece, a small army of Spartans, who had made an alliance with the Athenians, tried to block the Persian advance at a narrow pass called Thermopylae. The Persians called on the Spartans to throw down their weapons. "Come and get them yourselves," was the reply. "We have enough arrows to blot out the sun," threatened the Persians. "So much the better," cried the Spartans. "Then we'll fight in the shade." But a treacherous Greek showed the Persians a way over the mountains, and the Spartan army was surrounded and trapped. All 300 Spartans and 700 of their allies were killed in the battle, but not one of them tried to run away, for this was their law. Later, a Greek poet wrote these words into memory. "Go tell the Spartans, thou who passest by, that here obedient to their laws we lie." Now the Athenians had not been idle since their great victory at Marathon. They had a new leader called Themistocles, an astute and far-sighted man who repeatedly warned his fellow citizens that a miracle like Marathon would only happen once, and that if the Athenians were to continue to hold out against the Persians, that they must have a fleet, and so it was built. Themistocles had the whole of Athens evacuated, not that the population could have been very large in those days, and sent to the little isle of Salamis nearby. The Athenian fleet then positioned itself by the island. When the Persian land army arrived and found Athens abandoned, they set fire to the city and razed it to the ground. While the Athenians on their island remained unharmed, they watched as the burning city from afar. But now the Persian army appeared and threatened to surround Salamis. The allies panicked. They were all for taking their ships and leaving the Athenians to their fate. At that moment, Themistocles demonstrated an extraordinary ingenuity and daring. Having finally succeeded in persuading the allies not to leave, he secretly sent a messenger to Xerxes saying, "Make haste and attack, or the Athenians' allies will escape you." Xerxes, who must have heard from his spies that the allies were set on leaving, fell for it. The next morning he attacked with as many small and nimble warships, and he lost. The Greek ships were larger and less easy to maneuver, but once again they were fighting desperately for their freedom. Not only that, but their victory 10 years earlier at Marathon had inspired them with confidence. From a vantage point, Xerxes was forced to look on, while his smaller, lighter galleys were rammed and sunk by the Greeks' heavy ships. Aghast, he ordered the retreat, and so for the second time the Athenians were victorious and stand against an even greater army than before. This was in 480 BC. Soon afterwards, in 479 BC, the Persian land army was also defeated by the combined forces of the Greeks and their allies near Plataea. After this, the Persians never dared attack the Greeks, and this was very interesting, because it wasn't as if the Persians were weaker or more stupid than the Greeks. Far from it. But as I said before, the Greeks were different. For whereas great empires of the East bound themselves so tightly to the traditions and teachings of their ancestors that they could scarcely move, the Greeks, and their Athenians in particular, did the opposite. Almost every year they came up with something new. Everything was always changing. And the same went for their leaders. Miltiades and Themistocles, the great heroes of the Persian Wars, learnt this to their cost. One moment it was high praise, honors, and monuments to their achievements. Next it was accusations, slander, and exile. This was not the best feature of the Athenians, yet it was part of their nature. Always trying out new ideas, never satisfied, never at rest. Which explains why, during the 100 years that followed the Persian Wars, more went on in the minds of the people of the little city of Athens than in 1,000 years in all the great empires of the East. These ideas, the painting, the sculpture, the architecture, the plays and the poetry, the inventions and the experiments, the discussions and the arguments which the young brought to the marketplaces and the old to the council chambers still continue to concern us today. It is strange that it should be so, and yet it is true. And what would it have been like if the Persians had won at Marathon or at Salamis 10 years later? That I cannot say. Alright, guys. So, I hope you guys, I thought that was a good chapter to end on. The next chapter, which we'll probably do another day, will be 2 small cities on 1 small land. Alright, I'm going to catch up with chat because it sounds like Dark Duchess is done tonight. So guys, let's just take a look here. If Jazzpoo is not personally invited to my dirty poetry reading, I'll be disappointed. Yeah, I didn't have the hiccups, but I am definitely feeling the effects of the sickness, so I definitely need to stop reading. Somebody needs to say, I'll give you $1 if I stop hiccuping. My hiccups aren't that cheap. Obviously, everybody got the 300 references there. Dark Duchess is off to sleep tonight. Jazz and I want naughty poetry. Stay awesome sauce and make sure not to kill the Smexy for Jazzpoo's sake. Have a great night, Dark Duchess. Thank you for hanging out so long. All right. And lots of talk about everybody going to bed. So guys, I think it's time that we host somebody tonight. So while I am looking for this channel, and we are going to have to do, obviously I'm going to have to do a raid because Jazzpoo is here. So I'm just going to take a minute to bring up my following list and see who's online tonight. I'd love some feedback on that. Would you guys, so here's a question for you. Would you guys like this to be the beginning or the end of a stream? Or do you think that this could be like a story time on like Wednesday nights or something like that for you guys to hear? I guess I should put on some music again. Well, I'm taking a look for some possible hosts tonight. Oh, I know who we're gonna host. I will take a very special moment to thank some incredibly supportive people. We have Mr. Pornstar, we have Dark Duchess 90, Miss Ariella, Torjin, Weebro, Sleepbringer, Black Dahlia, Platinum Hamster, and Jazzpoo hosting us tonight. That is 9 channels, and there is a surprisingly large number of you people who decided to stay for the stream or for the reading stream. So I thought that was really nice of you guys. I'll do my best to maybe come up with some other visuals to associate with it. This is just my standard, what do you call it? My usual default, like, not doing anything image, but it's kind of static, so I'll work on that later. Tonight we are going to be hosting Alaskan Savage, who's a really great streamer. 3 nights a week, do it. End of stream, bedtime stories for you. You think at the end of stream or having its own special day with just this would be nice. 3 nights a week. System Shock's voice is going to be in your dreams. Only sub TC to all 3 of them. List all the ones who hosted. Oh, sure. Actually, Mystic, I'll do that on a tweet tonight. Okay. So, have a good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Again, Mr. Pornstar, Dark Duchess 90, Miss Ariella, Torrigen, Weebro, The Sleepbringer, Black Dahlia 1147, Platinum Hamster, and Jazzpoo. Thank you so much for hosting tonight. We are going to visit Alaskan Savage, and I will give you a raid message to send to him. We'll just say, we're tired of System Chalk. We heard this place was better. Definitely give him a chance if you guys haven't seen him before. He's pretty good. He's playing Rocket League. He's got a great personality, and it's a really interesting game to watch. So I hope you guys hang out, give him a shot, at least give him the chance to entertain you late at night tonight. So you don't have Twitter? Okay, well, Mystica, I'm going to copy and paste those names into the chat for you. But just give me a second to get the raid underway, because I know Jazzpoo will kill me if I don't. So www.twitch.tv/savage. Not a fan of Rocket League? Fair enough. Anyways, guys, thank you very much for hanging out tonight. That is it for me. So I am going to host Alaskan Savage and Mystica. I will give you that list of people who hosted me tonight. Thanks a lot, guys, and thank you very much. Thank you for the support, and thank you for being such a great audience. I hope you have a good night, and I will see you all Thursday for Shadowrun.